Important impact, if global warming continues, will be on the breadbasket of our nation and the world, the Midwest and Great Plains, which are expected to become prone to extreme droughts, worse than the Dust Bowl, within just a few decades, if we let global warming continue.
People are already suffering and dying from the consequences of the climate and environmental emergency.
Aunque la situación no es buena y el planeta sufre, la ventana para una oportunidad está todavía abierta, todavía estamos a tiempo.
This summer I saw the effects of climate change firsthand in our northernmost state, Alaska, where the sea is already swallowing villages and eroding shorelines, where permafrost thaws and the tundra burns. And it was a preview of one possible future.
You see, the world is getting warmer, and climate change is a reality. Climate change is affecting my country. Our glaciers are melting, causing flash floods and landslides, which in turn are causing disaster and widespread destruction in our country.
Climate change.
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 In simple words, it's the change in Earth's overall temperature and precipitation patterns. Our planet's average temperature has risen about 1.14 degrees Celsius in the last 100 years. This may not seem like much, but small changes in Earth's temperature can have big effects that may threaten the future of humanity. Most scientists say that humans are to be blamed. People drive cars, they heat and cool their houses, cook food and use things that consume energy. Burning oil, coal, fossil fuel, etc. puts harmful gases into the air. The gases cause the Earth's atmosphere to retain heat from the solar radiation. This can change the climate of a place. It can also change Earth's climate. Some of the visible effects are unpredictable weather patterns. Some regions becoming wetter and others drier. More prolonged and severe droughts. Increasing forest fires. Retreating ice sheets and glaciers. Increasing sea levels. Flooding and erosion. Poor crop yields. The richest nations of the world may have contributed to climate change, but the effects are first felt by the most vulnerable ones, those which have the least development. A country about 256 times smaller than the United States of America, tucked between the two giants of Asia. With 70% of the terrain covered with forest and 7% pressed beneath glaciers. With gross national happiness, it is not only one of the happiest countries in the world, but also the greenest. Bhutan, a small country taking big actions on combating climate change. Bhutan has been focusing on efforts to protect and preserve the rich vegetation and pristine environment under the leadership of its visionary monarchs since the 1970s.
Bhutan's environmental conservation policies dates way back in the early 1970s. So therefore today we have a very rich natural resources, of which 72% of the total area is still under forest cover, and 52% of the total area is under protected areas and also the biological corridors. The Constitution of the Kingdom of Bhutan also mandates to maintain at least 60% of the total area under forest cover for all times to come.
At present, Bhutan is one of the only 2 countries in the world that are carbon negative. It means that Bhutan actually absorbs more carbon dioxide than it emits as a nation.
Government has taken a lot of policy measures. For instance, like last year in 2020, the government has already approved the climate change policy, which mainly address to provide a strategic direction to maintain the carbon neutrality, as well as to build resilience of the lives and livelihoods of the community. And also the policy helps to clearly identify the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders involved in climate action, because I think climate is a cross-sectoral cut across many sectors, and all has to act. Everybody as a community, as a whole of society approach has to be taken at the national level.
Bhutan produces hydroelectricity and has surplus that it sells to the neighboring countries. And by 2025, Bhutan's increased hydroelectricity exports will let the country offset up to 22.4 million tons of carbon dioxide per year in the region.
The conservation of nature is also a big part of Bhutan's development philosophy, and as a result, many policies have been formulated to make sure that even in Bhutan's steps towards development, nature will always come first. In terms of forestry in Bhutan, we have many sustainable management practices, such as forest management units for the sustainable harvest of timber, community forests and non-wood forest product management plans, where a portion of the forests are handed over to local communities so that they may benefit by having access to resources, and at the same time they are responsible for taking care of these said forests. We also have plantations, mainly for barren and degraded areas, and ecotourism is constantly being pushed as a means for promoting not only tourism but also for bringing as less harm to the environment as possible.
The Bhutanese culture and belief system has deep respect and reverence for the natural world. It is generally looked down upon to cut trees or exploit the natural environment. It is also considered wrong to disturb the sources of water, including natural springs. Does this mean the people of Bhutan are amongst the original conservationists?
다 안에 공이 자드베 고기 람베 대 고기 대 고르잡디기 대 가송베베 베글에 때 같이 나기 란신에 당도서 대 란신 강범 슈기베 대 레주메 주디라 대디가 되면서 아진 당가자로 pomsal로 대 케미지 세둘라 다 안에 케미지 대 갈래 대가자라 나 담마라 람신 숨세티니라 봄 하가나기지 봄 장습자기니 봄 장하기 숨 아니 람친 숨세티라 대 안데 주기 단지베 유고디나기 땅풀레기 밤기 벽업드주 가해라 아니 람친 숨기베 단지베고라 다니 람친 숨디 로고 잡치베라 베고라 로고 잡디 로치 람친 담바기베 로니바디 람친 니바기베 로 숨바디 대 람친 숨바기베 아니 고르잡드라 베고 안데스 가해라 라지네 땅
These values are reinforced by the Constitution of Bhutan. It requires the country to maintain 60% of its forest coverage at all times and other commitments to remain carbon neutral and pursue an environment-friendly development path.
Putting all these efforts, Bhutan is not spared from the impacts of climate change. As the most vulnerable country with a very fragile mountain ecosystem, and also with a limited capacity to deal, the livelihoods and economy of the country is adversely impacted by the climate change. For instance, like 60% of our population still live in the rural areas whose livelihood is dependent on the farming system, which is very sensitive to the climate change. And similarly, the economy of the country is dependent on hydropower. Again, another very climate-sensitive sector. And also very recently, there are a lot of issues on drying off of water sources, which is one of the major source of water supply, both for drinking as well as irrigation for the farming communities. But these sources are drying up due to the impacts of climate change. And also increasingly, Bhutan faces threats from the climate hazard as well as the extreme weather events such as flash floods, landslides, glacial lake outburst floods, windstorm, forest fire, and also pest and diseases.
Monsoon has become very erratic. Now, weather is quite unpredictable. There are very clear signs of cyclones and mini cyclones, which were unheard of earlier because we are far away from the sea. All this is because of climate change, which at least we did not contribute to. Bhutan is not stopping. It has even bigger plans for the future. By 2030, it aims to reach zero net greenhouse gas emissions and to produce zero waste, replace all vehicles with electric cars, and much more. Bhutan has made possible what has been impossible for other nations. This carbon-negative wonder country has shown how we all can address climate change with compassion, commitment, and creativity. But Bhutan cannot act alone. No country exists in isolation. If we want to protect and preserve our planet for future generations, we must all work together to reduce our impact on climate. This means remaining conscious of our actions at the individual level.